I don't remember the exact moment I stopped being Christopher Johnson McCandless. Maybe it was when I stood on the side of the road in the Arizona heat, staring down at the smoldering remains of my wallet, my ID, my last few 20s, curling into ash like dying leaves. Or maybe it was a little before that, when I left Emory, turned the key in the ignition, and kept driving west with no intention of going back. Either way, that version of me, the obedient son, the high-achieving student, the one who sat through family dinners and said all the right things, he was gone, burned up, just like the cash. The Datsun had finally given out in the middle of Lake Mead National Recreation Area. It was a sun-bleached piece of metal, by then more a symbol than a car. After a flash flood rolled in and fried the engine, I took it as a sign. No more car, no more safety net. So I loaded up what I could carry and left the rest, including the license plates. One less way to be traced. You'd be surprised how freeing it is to just disappear, to walk away from everything. No goodbyes, no plans, no credit cards. It's like stepping off a moving train and realizing you never needed to be on it in the first place. That society thing, the 9-to-5s, the mortgages, the constant background noise of expectations, it's all just a big costume party. I was done playing dress up. They found my car, later of course. Park rangers towed it and probably scratched their heads at the pile of neatly stacked belongings and the unmarked bag of burned money. Somewhere in a file cabinet is a photo of that scene labeled "Abandoned Vehicle, Unknown Owner." Kind of poetic, isn't it? Historically, the Lake Mead area has swallowed more than Bandanoi continue. ChatGPT Danoi. Part 1 continued. Historically, the Lake Mead area has swallowed more than just the dreams of the broke and broken. It's a place of extremes temperatures that flirt with death waters that shift like secrets, and enough history buried beneath its surface to make an archaeologist cry. Rumors say there are mob bodies under the waterline left there during Vegas's bloodier days. That's the kind of place I walked away from. Fitting. At night, the desert sounds different. There's a kind of sacred silence that's almost arrogant in how little it cares about you. Coyotes laugh like drunk teenagers in the distance. The stars aren't twinkling. They're glaring like they know what you did. I remember lying on my back, using my rolled-up jeans as a pillow, chewing a granola bar slower than it deserved, and thinking, this is it. This is the life I was meant to live. Historians still debate whether I was brave or foolish. That's fine. They can keep debating. I wasn't thinking about legacy. I was thinking about the weight I'd shed. No more parents trying to buy my affection with fancy trips. No more lies about our perfect family. No more wondering whether I should follow the rules or rip them up. I ripped them. Loudly. Now, here's an odd fact. Burning money is technically legal in the U.S. unless it's done with fraudulent intent. So, if you're just some guy torching his 20s to feel alive, not illegal. Just unhinged. And maybe I was a little. But you tell me what's crazier. Spending 60 years behind a desk pushing papers or living each day like your skin is made of fireworks. I started calling myself Alexander Supertramp. Sounds like something a cartoon hero would choose, right? But I needed that name. It wasn't just an alias. It was armor. It let me strip away the baggage of Chris McCandless and all the guilt and pressure that name carried. Alex didn't owe anyone anything. He was free, wild, dangerous, stupid maybe, but blissfully so. I remember one morning, dust on my boots, sun climbing over the rocks. I stared at my reflection in a stagnant pool. My hair was a mess. I smelled like damp leather and dreams, and I smiled. Not the tight, polite smile I gave my professors, or the forced grin for family Christmas cards. A real smile. One that came from somewhere deep, somewhere untouched. I hitchhiked through Nevada and Utah, backpack bouncing against my spine, eyes wide with curiosity and maybe heat stroke. I met a guy named Carl who was trying to start a cactus farm. He gave me a watermelon and a warning. Out here, the desert don't forgive forgetfulness. I thanked him, took the melon, and promptly lost my only lighter the next day. So much for listening to wisdom. But that was the point, wasn't it? Every mistake was mine. Every sore muscle, every sunburn, every cold night mine. For the first time in my life, I wasn't living according to anyone else's map. I was scribbling my own. I knew my parents would be panicking by now, probably calling hospitals, filing missing person reports, crying into their expensive throw pillows. But I couldn't bring myself to care. Not because I hated them, I didn't, but because I needed them to feel the absence of me the way I'd felt the absence of authenticity in our home. Maybe that's cruel. Maybe it's justice. One morning, I sat by a roadside diner in Nevada, sipping lukewarm water and watching people. There was a family, dad, mom, 2 kids, all smiles. The kind of smiles that could be hiding anything. The boy had a toy dinosaur, and he made it roar while his dad laughed. For a second, I felt something sharp twist in my stomach. Not hunger, something else. A memory, maybe. Or a longing I didn't want to admit. But then I shook it off. I had places to be. Ghosts to outrun. Mountains to conquer. So I hitched another ride with a guy in a beat-up Ford pickup. And just like that, I vanished into the desert again. There's a funny rule about momentum. It doesn't care if you're going in the right direction. It just carries you. And I was riding that momentum like a drunk surfer, barely keeping balance, but loving every second of it. People always ask, "Weren't you scared?" And yeah, I was. Plenty. Every time a car slowed down and I couldn't see the driver's eyes. Every time I ran out of water. Every time the sun dipped and the temperature fell like a guillotine. But fear stops being a wall when you stare at it long enough. It just becomes another part of the scenery. So that's how it started. No big speech, no final goodbye. Just the crunch of gravel under my boots. The flicker of a flame devouring the last of my old life, and the whisper of wind through desert sage saying go. And I went. The first time I introduced myself as Alexander Supertramp, it came out half as a joke. I was standing on the side of a dirt road in northern Arizona, my thumb out sunburn, starting to tattoo my face when a rusty van slowed down and a woman with a cigarette behind her ear leaned out. "Name?" she asked, eyebrows like question marks. I hesitated, then grinned. "Alexander. Alexander Supertramp." She smirked. "Well, all right then, Supertramp. Hop in." And just like that, I became someone else. Traveling under that name gave me the kind of freedom you can't explain unless you've tried it. No expectations, no transcripts, no one asking where I went to school or what my major was. Just dusty boots, long roads, and the occasional awkward moment where I'd forget and respond to Chris. I moved north and west, mostly chasing something that didn't have a name. Not happiness, exactly, more like stillness, peace. A place where I didn't feel like I was acting all the time. Hitchhiking sounds glamorous until you're on your 5th hour of standing with your thumb out while semis blow past like angry whales. But there's a rhythm to it. You learn to read drivers. Who might stop? Who definitely won't? Who might stop for all the wrong reasons? Once a guy in Montana picked me up and offered me a beer. I declined politely. He was drunk enough for both of us. Kept telling me about how the government was run by lizard people. Swore he'd seen one in a Walmart. That ride ended quickly. Here's an odd fact. Lizard people conspiracy theories actually date back to the 1920s, long before the internet gave them legs. So, maybe he was just ahead of his time. Anyway, one of the best parts of the road is the characters you meet. It's like a rotating cast of weird uncles and kind-hearted misfits. There was Jan and Bob Rubber Tramp couple living out of a trailer near the Salton Sea. Jan reminded me of someone's hippie aunt who always had peppermint oil and unsolicited advice. She gave me a copy of Dr. Zhivago and said, "This book is going to break your heart." She wasn't wrong. Bob was quieter, smoked hand-rolled cigarettes, and built things out of scraps. He showed me how to wire a solar panel, which I promptly forgot. They offered to let me stay longer, but I didn't. I always moved on. Not because I didn't care, but because staying meant explaining. And I wasn't ready to explain myself, not to anyone. Historians still debate whether people like me, wanderers, drifters, vagabonds, are brave or just running from themselves. I think it's both. I was definitely running. But I was also looking for what I wasn't sure. Maybe redemption. Maybe silence. Maybe just the chance to breathe without feeling like I was borrowing oxygen. I journaled a lot, mostly messy thoughts, quotes from books, sketches of birds I couldn't name. But in the margins, there were hints. Freedom lies in being bold. Happiness is only real when shared. That last one would haunt me later. But at the time, it felt like a dare, like I was taunting myself. I spent a week in the Sierra Nevada, sleeping under the trees, waking up to cold air that smelled like pine and promise. One morning, I watched a bear cub try to climb a tree and fall backward with a thud, so cartoonish I actually laughed out loud. No one heard me, of course, but that laugh, it was real. Not polite, not forced, just joy. There's a weird tension that comes with solitude. It clears your mind, but also echoes your doubts. You start asking yourself questions you've been avoiding for years. Why am I really out here? What am I trying to prove? Do I think someone is watching? Would it matter if they were? One night, I found shelter in an old bus stop on the edge of a Colorado town. It smelled like wet wood and teenage mistakes. I shared it with a drifter named Lance, who claimed he once stole a police horse and rode it into a Taco Bell. Not sure if that's true, but it made a great story over cold beans and crackers. We talked about everything: music, books, the best flavor of Pop-Tarts, brown sugar, cinnamon, obviously. For a moment, I felt like I belonged. Then morning came, and I vanished again. It's just what I did. Sometimes I think I kept moving because I believed the moment I stopped, the grief would catch up to me. Not just my grief, the grief I caused. The calls my parents were making. The birthdays I missed. The people who worried and wondered. But the road made that distant. Like looking through the wrong end of binoculars. Blurry, quiet, and I liked it that way. Oddly enough, the more I disconnected from the world, the more alive I felt. I bathed in rivers, dried off in the sun, and ate meals that were 90% beans and 10% optimism. My fingers blistered. My back ached. But my heart beat differently. Slower, louder, like it finally had room. There was a moment outside of Carthage, South Dakota, where I worked for a while on a grain elevator that I almost stayed. Wayne Westerberg offered me steady work and a room above the shop. We talked late into the night sometimes about music and mistakes, and he never pushed too hard when I clammed up about my past. He even said, "You ever get tired of wandering? You've got a place here." I appreciated that, but I still left because Alaska was calling. Alaska. Even just saying the word felt like chewing on something sacred. Big, untamed, mythic. It was more than a destination to me. It was the final test. The wild beyond the wild. A place where all the noise of the world, the lectures, the resumes, the arguments about what I should do just disappeared into the snow. I had built it up in my head to be this holy land of self-reliance. I kept saying it in my journal over and over. I will live off the land. I will live off the land. Like if I wrote it enough times, the universe would nod in approval and send me a moose and a fishing rod. People sometimes ask why I didn't prepare more. Why I didn't take better gear, more food, a topographical map. Fair question. But here's the thing. I wasn't interested in surviving in comfort. I wanted the raw stuff, struggle, hunger, silence. I wanted to feel for once in my life what it was like to need something so badly that I could taste it in my bones. Here's a solid historical fact. The American obsession with the frontier has roots in Frederick Jackson Turner's famous thesis, which basically said, the frontier defined the American spirit, independence, reinvention, grit. I read that in college and thought, yup, that's me. I didn't realize then that even frontiers need strategy. Before I made it to Alaska, though, I floated. Literally. I spent months traveling down the Colorado River in a small canoe I'd picked up secondhand. I called it the USS Supertramp, which made me laugh every time I said it. The thing leaked, creaked, and tried to kill me at least once a week. But I loved it. There was one time near the Mexican border when I got stuck in a back channel, sunburned out of water, and yelling at a turtle like it had betrayed me. I ended up drinking from my canteen, even though the water inside tasted like wet dog and aluminum. Still alive, though. That's the bar, right? And here's an odd fact to chew on. While we're floating along, sea turtles can actually breathe through their butts. No kidding. Nature is weird and wonderful, and a little indecent sometimes. Eventually, I got picked up by immigration authorities because I didn't have ID and had somehow unknowingly drifted across the border. I spent a night in a cell, ate a burrito that may or may not have been meat. Then they let me go. It was another reminder, even when you try to disappear, the world still taps you on the shoulder sometimes. I kept heading north, journaling along the way, scribbling things like, the core of man's spirit comes from new experiences, and I am reborn in every sunrise. Yeah, it was a little dramatic. But when you're alone that long, everything starts to feel profound. Historians still debate whether I was chasing purity or punishing myself. Was I trying to find something real or run from something I couldn't fix? I never answered that. I just kept moving. In Oregon, I camped in a forest where the fog hugged the trees like an old friend. Every morning, I'd unzip my tent step into the silence and feel like I was walking into a cathedral. No stained glass, no sermons, just moss and crows and the occasional bear print that made me question all my decisions. Eventually, I made it to Fairbanks, Alaska in April of '92. I hitched a ride from a man named Jim Gallion, who, God bless him, tried everything he could to talk me out of going into the wild alone. "You sure you don't want a better rifle?" he asked, looking at my old .22 with a face that said, "This kid's gonna die out there." "I'll be fine," I told him, smiling like I knew something he didn't. He gave me a pair of boots and a bag of food anyway. That kind of quiet kindness still sticks with me. People say the world's full of cruelty, but it's also full of guys like Jim who hand you their lunch and wish you luck, even when they think you're making a terrible mistake. Jim dropped me off near the Stampede Trail, and I watched his truck disappear into the trees like it was taking the last bit of civilization with it. My backpack was too heavy, my shoes were too new, and I was grinning like a man who'd just been handed the keys to heaven. I followed an old mining road for days, sloshing through melting snow, crossing creeks that laughed at my waterproof boots. I felt invincible, untouchable, like every page of Jack London had just come to life. And then I saw it, the magic bus, abandoned, rusting, and perfect. Bus 42, sitting there like a postcard from God. Inside were old mattresses, a stove graffiti from previous wanderers, and enough charm to make it feel like a secret clubhouse in the middle of nowhere. I claimed it, my fortress of solitude, my home. I wrote in my journal, 2 years he walks the earth. No phone, no pool, no pets, no cigarettes. Ultimate freedom. That was my gospel. My declaration of independence. I wasn't lost. I was found. I hunted squirrels, foraged for berries, chopped firewood, like a man possessed. Some days, I sang out loud. Other days, I just listened to the wind thrum against the bus walls. No alarms, no emails, no small talk. Just me, the trees, and the ticking clock of my own heartbeat. I wrote more too. Pages and pages about beauty, about isolation, about how we've forgotten how to sit still and look at a mountain without needing to post about it. One day, a moose wandered near the bus. I held my breath. It looked at me like I was an idiot. Maybe it wasn't wrong. I thought I had everything I needed, but nature keeps secrets, and I was just beginning to learn how loud silence can be. I didn't think about my family much in those early days on the road. Not because I didn't love them, but because love, when it's tangled up in disappointment and resentment, becomes this heavy, confusing thing you can't quite carry in a backpack. Still, they haunted the edges of my silence. My mom's voice, always half sweet, half anxious. My dad, with his loud confidence and the kind of temper that could shake a house. My little sister Corrine. God, Corrine. She was the only one who really tried to understand me, and I left her anyway. Every so often, I'd pass through a town, sneak into a library, and feel this wave of guilt crawling up my spine. I'd think about her opening a birthday card that never came, or my parents staring at the dinner table wondering if I was dead in a ditch or just being dramatic. Here's a historical fact. In the U.S., over 600,000 people are reported missing every year. Most are found. Some don't want to be. I was one of those. In Carthage, South Dakota, when I stayed with Wayne Westerberg for a while, I started to soften. The work was hard grain elevators, machinery, the kind of labor that makes your palms tough and your back hurt, but it felt good. Real. Wayne didn't press for details. He just let me be Alex, the quiet kid with sharp eyes and a decent work ethic. One evening, I almost called home. Almost. The payphone buzzed in my ear, a tone so mechanical it felt like it belonged to another species. I dialed the first few digits, then stopped. What would I say? Hey, it's me. Just checking in. I'm not dead. Just lost on purpose. It didn't seem fair to them or to me. Historians still debate whether estrangement is selfish or necessary for growth. I've lived both sides. Sometimes stepping away is the only way to breathe. Other times it's a knife you keep twisting in your own heart. I did write letters, though. Not to my parents, but to friends I met along the way. To Jan and Bob. To a man named Ron Franz, who felt more like a grandfather than my actual grandfather ever did. He offered to adopt me once. I laughed, but he was serious. You need someone looking out for you, he said. He wasn't wrong. Here's an odd fact. Ron later gave up almost all of his possessions and hit the road himself, inspired by our talks. Imagine that me, the runaway, leaving behind a trail of accidental disciples. I left fragments of myself everywhere. Postcards with rambling thoughts. Books with underlined sentences. Notes scribbled in margins that said things like, "Happiness is found in the beat of your own drum," not the applause of others. Yeah, I got a little poetic. Solitude will do that to you. My parents eventually hired a private investigator. I picture him tracking my trail, like a ghost hunter, collecting breadcrumbs of my movement, an abandoned Datsun here, a job in Carthage. There are stories of a polite hitchhiker who ate like he hadn't seen a fridge in years. Meanwhile, I just kept moving. Sometimes I'd sit alone in the woods and imagine their faces if they saw me. Skin tanned to leather, beard scruffy and wild, clothes frayed, backpack worn thin. Would they recognize me? Would they cry? Yell, hug me. Kareen probably would have hugged me first, then yelled. That thought stuck with me for miles. The deeper I got into the wild, the more the world I left behind began to feel like a dream, like someone else's life. Birthday parties, SAT scores, family photos on the mantle that were more posed than honest. All of it seemed so staged. There's this thing that happens when you stop performing for everyone. You start noticing how quiet the world can be, how loud your thoughts become, how memories sneak up on you in the strangest ways. One afternoon, in a meadow, I saw a group of deer grazing. The wind shifted and one of them turned, stared at me, then bounded away. I almost called out, "I'm not going to hurt you." But that felt silly. Then again, everything feels silly when you're talking to deer. That night, I dreamt of Kareen and me as kids playing hide and seek in the backyard. I hid behind the shed and stayed so quiet for so long she started crying thinking I'd run away. I came out laughing, but she didn't find it funny. Neither of us knew that someday it'd stop being a game. I wonder what my parents thought when they found out I'd changed my name, when they realized their son had become someone else entirely, not just in spirit, but in ink. Maybe it felt like a betrayal. Maybe it was. But to me, it was survival. You see, to walk away from a life that looks good on paper is a kind of death. And the rebirth doesn't always make sense to the people left behind. It's messy, painful, lonely, but it's real. And in the wild, real is the only currency that matters. If you looked at my path on a map, it would probably resemble a drunk spider's web. No straight lines, no real destination, just a series of zigzags driven by instinct, hunger, and the occasional generous stranger with a dusty truck and an open heart. I relied on people more than I like to admit. For someone so determined to be independent, I sure did eat a lot of meals handed to me by others. There was Tracy, a sweet girl I met at the Slabs, this off-the-grid community in the California desert, where lost souls and old souls gather like tumbleweeds. She couldn't have been more than 17. We shared cold coffee and warmer glances, but I kept my distance. I knew she liked me. I also knew I wasn't sticking around. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was just already halfway gone. "Why do you always have one foot out the door?" she asked once, wrapping a bandana around her wrist like a charm. I shrugged. "Because if you stand still too long, the world starts telling you who you are." She rolled her eyes. Maybe that's not always a bad thing. She might have been right. But I left the next day. I met so many people, each one a little universe of their own. A Vietnam vet who swore the squirrels were spies. A woman named Loretta who made blackberry jam like it was a religion. A teenager named James who let me sleep in his family's barn in Oregon and told me he wanted to be a magician someday. Here's a weird little fact. The Magic Castle in Los Angeles, a real-life academy for magicians, has a strict dress code that includes capes. Capes. I'd have fit right in if I'd brought my sleeping bag. The truth is, the kindness of strangers saved me more times than I could count. A sandwich here, a dry blanket there, a ride when my legs gave out, and not one of them asked for anything in return. Some people believe the world is full of cruelty, but I've seen more kindness from people with nothing than I ever saw. At fancy dinner parties, with cloth napkins and passive-aggressive toasts, historians still debate whether humans are inherently good or selfish. Maybe we're both. But I know this when you look tired, skinny, and road-worn people surprise you with their softness. Ron Franz was one of those people, a retired military man in California who picked me up hitchhiking and didn't let me go, not in a clingy way, just in a gentle, grandfatherly way. He gave me a place to stay, taught me leatherworking, even offered to adopt me. "I haven't had a family in a long time," he said, handing me a glass of sun tea. I looked at him and smiled. "I haven't had one that understood me." We built a belt together. He showed me how to stamp designs into the leather Stars Mountain's initials. I carved Alex into the buckle. That belt traveled with me all the way to Alaska. Ron cried when I left. I hugged him tighter than I meant to. Some nights, under the stars, I'd remember his words, "You can't be alone forever, Alex. Sooner or later, you're going to want someone to come home to." I didn't know how to explain that I wasn't running from people. I was running from the version of me they wanted to keep. The road is honest, brutal sometimes, but honest. You learn to live with less food, less comfort, less noise. You start noticing the things no one talks about, like how gas stations smell different at 2 a.m., or how every diner waitress over 40 has a tragic love story and a tattoo she regrets. One night in Oregon, I ended up sharing a campfire with a guy named Jerry. He wore a neon pink poncho and claimed he'd been struck by lightning twice. "Nature's just trying to reboot me," he joked, waving a hot dog on a stick. We laughed till our stomachs hurt. I told him about Alaska. He looked into the fire and said, "Be careful, man. Dreams have teeth." That line stuck with me. I always moved on. No matter how many campfires, conversations, or kindnesses I encountered, I never stayed. Some called it commitment to a dream. Others would say it was fear of connection. Maybe both. But there was one constant pulling me forward, Alaska. It had become more than a place. It was an idea. A final chapter. A clean slate. A challenge I needed to meet, not just for adventure, but for meaning. When people gave me rides and asked why I was headed north, I'd just smile and say, "Because that's where the wild lives." And they'd either nod in silence or offer me their last granola bar. The trailhead wasn't marked. Just a rough turnoff from the highway, swallowed by trees and patches of stubborn snow. Jim Gallion had just dropped me off. I remember his truck lingering for a second, like even the vehicle wasn't sure this was a good idea. He gave me his boots, a sack of rice, and that quiet, fatherly look, the kind that says you don't have to do this. But I did. I slung my pack over my shoulder, adjusted the strap, digging into my collarbone, and stepped into the wild. It was April 28th, 1982, the Stampede Trail was less a trail and more a memory of one mud and melting snow, tangled branches, and the occasional washed-out tire track. Every few steps, I'd sink up to my ankles and laugh like an idiot. This wasn't a vacation. It wasn't a spiritual retreat. It was me versus everything. Here's a hard historical fact. The Stampede Trail was originally carved out for a mining operation in the 1930s. But it was abandoned, half-finished. Like Alaska shrugged and said, "Nope." Nature took it back, as she always does. My gear was light, maybe too light. 20 pounds of rice, a rifle, a sleeping bag, some books, a field guide to edible plants, and that leather belt Ron helped me make. Not much else. I didn't want excess. I wanted purity. That sounds poetic until your sleeping bag's soaked and your stomach's echoing like a church bell. After 3 days of slogging through the terrain, I stumbled upon it. The magic bus. Bus 142. It looked like something dropped from the sky. Green and white leaning slightly windows, cracked but still standing. A ghost of civilization in a cathedral of wilderness. Inside, there was a mattress, stove, old graffiti, broken windows, patched with duct tape and dreams. It was perfect. I made it mine. I unpacked, hung my boots, sat on the edge of the seat that still smelled like motor oil and old leather. I wrote in my journal, "Here I am. I have arrived. No longer a boy, but a man. The wild is my teacher." I felt invincible. Every morning I'd wake to frost on my eyebrows and the smell of pine in my nostrils. I cooked rice over a fire, boiled snow-red Tolstoy until the ink felt like prayer. When I got lucky, I trapped squirrels. Once I shot a porcupine. Tasted like regret. Still ate it. And then, the moose. I shot it. Clean kill. My adrenaline was a symphony. I had meat enough to last weeks. I skinned it, tried to preserve the meat using advice from a book and hope, but I failed. The meat spoiled, maggots danced. The stench of wasted life filled the bus. I cried, not for the meat, for the arrogance. That night, I wrote, "I now understand the fragility of victory and the price of ignorance." Historians still debate whether I underestimated the wild or just misjudged its timeline. Surviving in Alaska isn't about courage, it's about patience, about knowing that the mountains don't care how poetic your soul is. Still, I was alive. I was learning. I was feeling every moment like it was my last. Odd fact: in Alaska, daylight in summer stretches forever. The sun barely sets, it just sort of sighs and leans sideways. Time feels elastic. You eat when you're hungry, sleep when you're tired, and stop caring what day it is. I dance sometimes, alone in the woods, shirtless, barefoot, sunburned. Just me and the trees and the soundtrack of buzzing flies. It sounds crazy, but it was honest. I'd sing too, badly. Old folk songs, Beatles tunes, and that one Shania Twain chorus I couldn't get out of my head, thanks to a radio I'd heard back in Fairbanks. Some days were heaven. Others were long, slow unravelings. I missed people more than I admitted. The idea of people anyway, someone to share a laugh, to point at a bear track and say, "Do you think that's fresh?" and then laugh when you both run away just in case. But I didn't leave. I couldn't, because leaving felt like failing. This wasn't a weekend experiment. This was the test, the ritual, the proof. I read, I wrote, I prayed in the only way I knew how, by listening. To the wind, to the creak of the trees, to the rhythm of my own breath. And then the river rose, that small, manageable river I'd crossed weeks ago, swollen now, ferocious, screaming with meltwater from the mountains. No bridge, no detour. Just a wall of cold rage between me and civilization. I tried, waded in. The current nearly pulled me under, my backpack filled with water. I crawled back coughing, defeated. I was trapped. I went back to the bus, sat on the mattress, stared out the window, wrote in my journal, "River impassable. Must wait." And I waited for the water to recede, for luck, for something. The days started blending together. Morning light would filter through the cracked bus windows, and I'd lie there listening to the distant rustle of branches. I wasn't cold anymore, just tired and hungry. Deep gnawing hunger that hollowed out my thoughts and made every step feel like it echoed. The rice was almost gone. My ribs were starting to show. My legs felt like broomsticks. I wrote less in my journal, not because I had nothing to say, but because even lifting the pen felt like lifting a boulder. I tried to forage, looked through the field guide with eyes that barely focused, picked berries, chewed wild roots, boiled bark. I even found what I thought were edible seeds, carried them back, cooked them, ate them slow. They tasted like hope. But then, the nausea came. Cramps, dizziness, that crawling feeling in my skin. I flipped frantically through the book again. Was it wild potato seeds? Was it something else? Historians still debate whether I misidentified a plant or whether my body simply couldn't process it anymore. There's even a theory about a mold that grew on the seeds during storage. Who knows? I never did. And here's an odd fact to twist your gut. Certain edible plants can become toxic if stored improperly or exposed to moisture over time. Nature doesn't always give second chances. By the time I realized something was really wrong, I was too weak to do much about it. Walking hurt, my joints ached, my thoughts wandered. I'd start a sentence and forget how it ended. Still, I kept writing sloppy, slanted words that slipped off the page like whispers. I have had a happy life, and thank the Lord. Goodbye, and may God bless all. That was the last clear sentence I scribbled. I wasn't scared. Not in the way you'd think. There was sadness, sure, regret maybe, but also this strange peace, like I'd finally burned through all the noise and found the stillness I'd been chasing. I spent my last days in the bus, lying under the faded ceiling, wrapped in my sleeping bag like a cocoon. Sometimes I'd laugh at nothing. Sometimes I'd cry at everything. Sometimes I'd just watch the light move across the wall and pretend it was someone coming to find me. I left one last note taped to the door, scrawled in shaky handwriting, SOS. I need your help. I am injured near death and too weak to hike out of here. I am all alone. This is no joke. In the name of God, please remain to save me. No one came. The animals still wandered past, indifferent. The sky changed moods, but never answered. The river, that cruel wall of water, kept singing its icy song. On my final day, I pulled out my camera and took a photo of myself. Sunken face, hollow eyes, a faint smile that didn't quite reach the surface. I held a sign that read, I have had a happy life. Maybe that sounds delusional. Maybe it was. But it was also true. For all the pain and the hunger and the dumb decisions I had lived the way I wanted, I had tasted freedom. Real freedom. The kind that doesn't come with seatbelts or receipts. The kind that asks for everything and offers only itself in return. I thought about Corrine, about Ron, about Jan and Bob. I thought about my parents too. About the things I should have said and didn't. About the things I said that hurt. About the quiet ways we all fail each other. And I thought about the bus, how this rusted, broken thing became my church. My cradle, my confession booth. Eventually, my body stopped asking for food. It just wanted sleep. Long, endless sleep. The kind that pulls you out to sea and doesn't let you swim back. And I let it. Sometime in August, while the leaves outside the magic bus started whispering that fall was coming, I closed my eyes for the last time and disappeared. They found me weeks later. A group of moose hunters. My journal was still there. My camera, my note. Bus 142 became a shrine. People came from all over. Some cried. Some prayed. Some just stood in the doorway and listened to the silence. Eventually, they airlifted the bus away. Too many people were getting hurt trying to find it. But it still exists, you know. Not just in photos, not just in books or documentaries. It exists in that place inside people. The part that dreams of something bigger than suburbia, louder than spreadsheets, freer than fluorescent lights. If you're quiet enough, sometimes you can still hear it. The wild, calling. Sometimes a story isn't about answers. It's about the questions we're willing to walk into the wilderness to ask. Christopher McCandless Christopher Johnson. McCandless walked away from comfort, from family, from everything scripted and polished. He didn't do it for glory. He didn't do it for attention. He did it because he felt caged in a world obsessed with doing things the right way. And maybe he was reckless. Maybe he was unprepared. But he was also brave in a way that most of us never dare to be. His story is filled with contradictions, freedom and loneliness, joy and suffering, discovery and loss. It's not a fairy tale. It's a slow unraveling of a young man searching for truth in pine trees and silence. He met kind souls who tried to anchor him. He loved in fleeting glances and half-written letters. And he died in the place he thought would finally make him whole. But what he left behind was more than a body. He left behind a question mark, a challenge to all of us. What are we living for? What weight are we carrying that doesn't belong to us? When was the last time we heard our own thoughts without someone else's voice interrupting? As you sit with his story, let it settle gently. Don't rush to label it. Let it breathe. Because sometimes the most powerful thing a person can do is walk away.